Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to Gather and Go, the podcast that helps you plan, promote, and lead better trips. My name is Brian Jewell. I am your host, and man, I am so excited that you decided to spend some of your time with us. Got a great show for you today. Our featured conversation is with Scott Brodsky. Now, Scott is the president of Country Heritage Tours, and he's going to tell us all about how he and his family have built a thriving tour company based on a really interesting special interest niche. You won't want to miss it. Before we talk to Scott, though, we need to start with some travel news. Now, sometimes we talk to you about travel news you may have missed. Today, I want to hit on some travel news that has probably been front and center in your face, especially if you have done any kind of travel at all this summer. So traveling this summer has been difficult. Flying has been especially difficult, and we have some numbers in to prove it. I'm going to read to you from a recent story in Travel Weekly, a tourism travel agent trade publication. Here's what the story says. It says, for flights into, within, or out of the U.S., the cancellation rate this year through June 20th was 3%, up from 2% for the calendar year 2019. Now, what that means is that in between 2019 and this year, the rate of cancellations of flights in and to and from the U.S. has gone up by 50%. That means for every 2 cancellations there were in 2019, there are 3 cancellations this year. Even though there are fewer planes flying. That data comes from FlightAware, which is a service that tracks airline movement across the world. The article goes on to say, quote, the delayed arrival percentage, which the DOT, or Department of Transportation, defines as flights that are at least 15 minutes late, sat at 20% for 2022, compared to 16% in 2019. Now, that means, again, that the number of flights, or the percentage of flights that are being delayed, is up almost 20% from 2019, before the pandemic, to 2022. Now, what's driving this? Well, if you pay attention to travel, you probably know the answer. This is all being driven by staff shortages. These are staff shortages among airline crew. There are staff shortages among ground workers. These are shortages among security workers, TSA, airport workers, anybody who is involved in getting you from one airport to another airport. Well, they're experiencing big staff shortages right now, and those shortages are making big impacts on summer travel. And honestly, it looks like it's probably going to be this way throughout the summer, and we actually don't know how much longer it's going to go. It could continue into the fall and winter, but certainly during the summer when so many people are trying to travel, it's going to be more difficult than we're used to. So what are some things that you can do to account for this to make sure it doesn't derail your trips? Well, the first thing you need to do is just plan to arrive early. If you're like me and you like to get to the airport just in the nick of time to sail through security and get to your gate, I have to tell you, you probably need to give yourself more time than you're used to, especially if you are checking bags, because airline check-in counters are crowded, the staffs are stretched too thin, and so you may need an extra hour just to make it to your gate. The other thing you need to do is you need to allow more time for your total travel. That means when you're booking flights, if you are booking flights with connections, you need to give yourself more time in that connecting airport, especially if you are clearing security, or rather if you are clearing customs and immigration coming back into the U.S., because I've been hearing reports that those lines are 2 and 3 hours long right now in some airports. And if you only have a 2 or 3 hour connection, then you know that is a bad deal. So you need to give yourself more time for connections. What that does is allows you some flexibility if the airline you're flying has to delay or cancel one of your flights. Having more time in your connecting airport gives you a better chance of getting on a new flight or getting on a scheduled flight that is not going to be disrupted if your incoming flight was delayed. So you need to allow more time. And finally, you need to pack your patience, because everybody is doing the best they can. The airline crews, the cabin crews, the flight attendants, the check-in counter people, the gate agents, they're all doing the best they can. They are all burnt out. They are all stressed. They don't like canceled or delayed flights any more than you do. And when your travel is disrupted, Well, it's not their fault. So pack your patience, bring your best self to the airport, and we're all going to get through this together. So that brings us to today's road tip. Now, sometimes our road tips don't really have anything to do with the news we're talking about. Today, I want to give you a road tip that directly relates to the problems we are having in travel today. Now, if you've been in travel for any length of time, you have probably heard of travel insurance. Depending on how you feel about it, you may buy travel insurance a lot. You may think, you know what, I don't need to spend the extra money. My tip for you today is that it's time to give travel insurance a second look, especially when you are planning important trips. Flights are getting canceled, flights are being delayed. And if you are planning on going on a trip that is important to you and you're planning on using an airline to get there, you just can't take it for granted that the airline's going to get you there on time, that your bag is going to get there when you do. All of the things that you hope will go right when you travel, more and more often they're going wrong. And you need travel insurance to cover you in case an airline snafu disrupts your vacation. Now, there are all sorts of insurance plans out there. I'm not going to sit here and tell you one is better than the other, but you need to look for travel insurance that has trip delay and trip cancellation terms in it. You also need to look for something that is going to cover you specifically in case of pandemic-related delays. If you have to miss a flight or an entire trip because of sickness or someone else in your party does, you want to have that coverage so that you are not dropping thousands of dollars on trips that you have looked forward to for a long time, only to find the trip is disrupted or canceled because of something outside of your control, and you are left without a trip and without your money. So today's road trip, buy that travel insurance, especially if the trip is important to you. The more meaningful and the more sentimental this trip is, the more important it is to buy the travel insurance. I just booked a trip for my family to Mexico for spring break next spring, and I am buying travel insurance for it. Even though it's going to cost a few $100s, it is money well spent. That's your road tip of the day. Now, before we move on, I want to share a little bit of news from our organization, the Group Travel Leader. In the September issue of our magazine, we are going to have our annual buyer's guide for the group travel industry. If you have been a reader before, you have seen this buyer's guide, you have probably kept it on your desk all year because we pack that issue full of really good, really helpful information, practical information for people who are planning tours. I want to give you a little bit of a preview of what you're going to see coming up in our September issue. We're going to have an article about creative problem solving that's going to give you some ideas about how you can overcome problems such as my people aren't ready to travel, or I can't find baggage handling in hotels, or prices are getting too high. We're going to introduce you to some new faces in tourism, people you haven't met before but ought to meet. We're going to tell you how to find affordable destinations even when inflation is getting crazy. And we're going to give you tips on finding new travelers for your travel program. So keep an eye out for that issue in September. You won't want to miss it. If you're interested in advertising that issue, our sales staff here would be happy to help you with that. You can reach them by calling 888-253-0455, and they will get you hooked up. All right, now it's just about time for us to move into our featured conversation with Scott Brodsky. Make sure you stay tuned to after the conversation, though, because after the conversation, I am going to share a hot minute with you about how I think we need to be dealing with the staffing shortages in the travel industry. So hang around, see whether you like what I have to say, or maybe you don't. Either way, you won't want to miss it. We'll be right back with Scott Brodsky. All right. So if you're looking for even more reasons to make plans to visit Savannah, look no further. From the moment you arrive, you'll be greeted with moss-draped live oak trees, fresh coastal breezes, and enchanting history around every cobblestone street. Savannah strikes a delicate balance between hip and historic, casual but cool, elegant yet approachable. Spend the day exploring the city's illustrious culture, roaming through the green city squares while sipping on your go-to cocktail before hopping a trolley to your next adventure. The best experiences happen when you let Savannah take you along for the ride. You never know what characters you'll meet or what's in store for your next tour. And that's just the way they like it. See why groups of all sizes fall in love with Savannah at visitsavannah.com. All right, everybody. My guest today is the president of Country Heritage Tours, which is a tour company focused on a very specific niche that has been in business for 37 years. Can't wait for you to hear all about this fascinating company and the fascinating people that run it. So without further ado, here is Scott Brodsky. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am so happy to have you. Now, here's a question for you. When you are at a cocktail party or a social event or something like that in your hometown, and everybody starts asking the obligatory questions, what do you do for a living? What kind of responses do you get from people when you tell them that you run a quilting focused tour company?
So usually the first response that people have is a what? They're unfamiliar that niche tours do exist. So usually I backtrack a little bit and tell them about what the industry is, and then kind of focus in on exactly what we do. And that's when people's interest really peaks.
So do you ever get people who say, wait a minute, you do not look like a quilter?
Yes, all the time. I do have a prepared response for that. So I usually tell people I'm an intellectual quilter.
I like that. So you guys actually have a pretty cool story. So take us back 37 years ago and tell us about how your tour company got its start.
So the story is really cute. It's we are a family-owned business started by my mother 37 years ago when her family, my father, relocated to New Hampshire. My mother got a call one day. She's always been a crafter all of her life. Got a call one day for a craft tour through New England that had lost their tour guide. And could she fill in? My mother, having no experience ever, said, of course I could. So she took out a craft tour of New England, came back from it and said, I can do this as a hobby. Took out a small business loan for $2,000, went and bought stationery and a broken typewriter and set up shop in the basement of my childhood home. And it's interesting because that typewriter, the Q did not work. So she would type in O and then put a squiggle in it with a pen, which is a lot of work for a quilt tour company.
For sure.
But it started in the basement, childhood home. One tour was a hobby. Then one tour became two. Two became three. My father said, "Hey, there's some cash, opportunities here." He moonlighted in the business doing graphic design and computer design, since computers had really just kind of hit everyone's home. And then the business grew. It eventually grew to the point where my father left his breadwinning career to work full time in the business, and that's when it really took off. When 4 tours became 8, and so on and so on. Then international product got introduced, and it became their career, unexpectedly.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that international product and kind of the wide variety of tour experiences you offer in a minute. But I'm curious, how old are you when your mom jumps into this new venture?
I was 9 years old. Just moved to New Hampshire, and what was very interesting about the whole venture is my parents were very consistent about keeping their kids out of the business. They never wanted us to. They never wanted us to feel that when we get older that this was our lot in life. So we were excluded from it in many ways. But growing up with it, you always knew the ins and outs. The phone was ringing in the basement that my parents were answering. There were brochures hanging around. My mother was sitting on the couch watching TV, stuffing envelopes and licking stamps. Wow. So it was always around.
Yeah. So as a child, you are sort of intentionally not brought into the fold. But here we are now in 2022, and you're the president of the company. So fill in the blanks for us. How did that happen?
Interesting how it happens. The business grew large enough that it had multiple employees in it at its peak when my parents had it. And then, of course, as they were aging, they started to decrease the size of the business. The more tours you do, the more work there is. And at one point, I was living in New York, in Manhattan, working a career on Broadway and for Lincoln Center. And I knew I wanted to change, and I joked with my father about coming up and working with him. and he didn't think it was funny. He thought it was a great idea. So I thought about it, I talked about it, and I kind of took the leap, not knowing what I was getting into, not having really any experience in the travel industry except for touring with Broadway productions. Packed up my apartment in New York, moved to New Hampshire, and got a desk in the basement of my parents' of my childhood home, and that's where I started. It was a different pace of career, working side by side with my parents. They found their rhythm of how to work together by not working in the same room together. One would be on the top floor. Yeah, it's how it succeeded. But it was interesting because as I sat down at the desk and I started looking at everything, I already knew a lot of it. I'd grown up with it. I've just never really put the knowledge to use. So in 2011, is when I left New York, moved to New Hampshire, and sat side by side with my parents and started to learn the industry. As a matter of fact, I still have the book that my mother gave me on the day that I started that explains the terminology of the travel and tourism industry.
Wow, that's incredible. 2011. So you came in somewhat cold, although you had a lot of just knowledge from being in the environment for a long time. But how long did it take before you felt like, okay, I've really got a handle on this business and the industry that it's a part of?
There's two moments that stand out. One was when I went out with product. I stepped foot on a motor coach in front of guests to really get a better look at what the day-to-day operations were of a over-the-road land tour. So that was one piece that got me energized and excited, to see what we actually do, what we're producing. And then also was my parents were very big NTA members, National Tour Association. So, and of course they pressed on me to go to a convention the first year I was with the company, and I attended NTA. And that's really where it clicked that this isn't just a business run out of the basement of the home. It's something much bigger. It's part of an industry, and the industry is endless, and it's fun, and the people that are there energize you. They have ideas, they have their thinking caps on, and really kind of, the sky's the limit, is what I saw with being able to put tours together and create.
Yeah. So you mentioned it being a fun industry, and that's something that I have seen for years and heard people talk about. But you have a background in Broadway, which I also perceive as fun. So can you sort of give us a little bit of context, like compared to what seems like a high profile, in the spotlight sort of career, performing or around performers, and then coming into tourism, which is different, but fun certainly in its own way. How did that transition feel for you? And do you have any regrets?
It's a really good question, Brian. So it took me a small amount of time, to understand how to use my education and my career knowledge and apply it towards into the travel industry. Now, the travel industry obviously is fun for being able to go places and do things, but in terms of following passion, I had to find how to use the rules and tools that I had in my toolbox. So my career on Broadway was as a designer for Broadway productions, off Broadway, and then for the Metropolitan Opera and New York City Opera at Lincoln Center. So really tapping into the creative side of things. Where I found my place in the tourism industry is putting a tour together is no different than putting a production on Broadway together. You have a research phase of compiling all the components, auditioning, the attractions that you want to include, you don't want to include, putting all of this on paper, and having it run a nice choreographed presentation that takes finesse. So that's where I learned how to really apply my passion to it. It's all artistic components, especially with our niche, which is quilting, which I wasn't a quilter coming into the business either. So, there's two learning curves that I was grabbing. So finding where I sat with all of it, and sat comfortably, Took a little bit of time, but once it clicked, it's I may not be a quilter, but I certainly can appreciate craftsmanship, design qualities, art, what it takes to put a quilt together, and not only a quilt, but any piece of art.
Yeah. So, it seems to me that your specific story and even your whole company story is really just proof of how foolish sort of the expertise fallacy is in society, or at least in our minds. This idea that you can't do something unless you're an expert already, right? I mean, your mom was not a tourism expert. She liked quilting and she figured it out. And then you come in and you're not even a quilter. You don't have, a cultural touch point with these people who you are selling to, but you come in and you figure it out. So how does someone who has some savvy and some passion overcome the lack of expertise and find success, even if it's unlikely success?
It's, so I've always believed that there's an endless pool of knowledge out there. I have all kinds of interests that from gardening to architecture to theater arts, and now fiber arts. Pursuing your passion is something that should be in front of everyone all the time. And I was up for the challenge. Once I took a step back and realized that there was a major industry here and a lot of players involved, it became a challenge that I wanted. So when I work with DMOs to put tours together, I asked them to put their thinking cap on, because I don't necessarily for the business want the standard attraction that everyone can go and see. Part of our business model is we're offering more behind the ropes experiences, stuff that brings you beyond the guidebook. And I don't, I don't necessarily, it's not a good fit to put people into the regular attraction that everyone goes to. I want to know what's off the beaten path. And then, I find that DMOs have a really good time because they actually have to, do a little bit more digging to find stuff that is, even more interesting than their initial, ideas were. So it's, to circle back to your question, you got to find passion in it. It's there. You have to enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, it's not the right thing. And it's connections and people and smiling faces. And at the end of the day, providing people's vacations is a pretty cool thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's easy, I think, sometimes for those of us who have been in tourism a long time to get a little bit jaded, or, so used to being on the road, seeing cool stuff, staying in hotels, that it just becomes part of a day's work. I know I've been in that situation myself, but when you stop and step back and realize, like, what I'm working on and the experiences I'm providing are creating community among people who may not be connected to each other and are making new friendships, or we're creating memories that are going to last in generations of families. We're setting the table for conversations and meals and experiences that families are going to carry with them for the rest of their lives. Like, that is huge and that's powerful. And I just feel like we need to remember that sometimes,
It's always very important. It's, I think I learned at NTA one year that nostalgia plays a very important part in product development. And so I always keep that in front of me. And then also too, in terms of trying to keep myself, interested and active in the business, is there's a very direct line of sight from what I do to what gets, produced tour-wise, and then how our clients react. And I'm a person that I like to try things. There's a ton of different media out there right now, between social media, internet advertising, print advertising, podcasts. Dipping your toes in the water of everything gives you that opportunity to try things.
So let's talk about quilting tours in specific, because I know of some quilt museums or some quilt festivals or things like that. But if you asked me right now today to put together an entire tour that would appeal to people who are into quilts, I would have to call you, because I wouldn't have an idea where to start. So what do you do on a quilting tour?
It's a good question, and I would be a good person to call for it. So our over-the-road tours, which are 7 to 10 to 14 days, are going to visit all the local cultural and historical attractions of any destination that you would want to see while visiting. When you're in Charleston, South Carolina, you want to go to the market. You want to take a carriage ride. So we include all of those. And then where I ask the DMOs to put on their thinking cap is, where can I find the quilting component? Just speaking of Charleston itself, right downtown is the Charleston Museum, which is dedicated to Charleston, South Carolina's history. But the Charleston Museum also has one of the largest quilt collections in the South of Southern plantation quilts than anywhere else in the country. Most people don't know it. So all of a sudden now I have a destination, in a destination to partake in. And then, we always focus, we try to focus, around a major quilting event. Those are the easy tours to put together. You have quilt shows in Paducah and in Houston, Texas, and Sisters, Oregon. Those are certainly the easy ones to build out. But our other tours, that don't have quilt shows, we incorporate in Amish country. We visit an Amish farm where they have a quilting bee going on. So it does take some digging on our end and research, continuing, to build out a tour. But so the overall makeup of a tour is going to be the attractions of the area that you want to see. Quilt shops will be in there. We're pretty picky about which ones we include, and then some type of quilt-focused opportunity.
Yeah, that's cool. And what I love looking at your website is just how many places around the country and even around the world that you have found those connections to quilting. So just browsing through what you guys are offering this year, I see Paris in Switzerland, I see Italy, I see New England, I see the South, I see Texas. So give us some examples of how you, no pun intended, but how you weave quilting into some of these places that people of all stripes love to visit. So,
it's there's stories behind the stitches is what we like to say. When looking at opportunities, for tour operators out there, marketing is one of the most important parts of the business. So we always look for a destination first, a destination that people want to visit. So there may be a fantastic quilt show in Boise, Idaho, but not many people ever say that that's where they want to go on vacation. So that becomes a hard sell. So we always look for destinations first that are well-traveled, well thought out, and offer plenty to do for our guests in terms of hotel amenities and walkouts from city center properties. So once we find a destination that we know resonates really well, that's our point of departure. Then we go out from there. I've been incredibly surprised that once you start to dig in, there are quilts everywhere. Obviously in Pennsylvania, Amish country, there's plenty. Hamilton, Missouri, believe it or not, Hamilton, Missouri, home of Missouri Star Quilt Company, relatively new on the scene in the last 10 years, is now affectionately known as the Disneyland of quilting. What's in Hamilton, Missouri? Nothing. But that quilt company is, and it's a household name. So knowing that, we build out a tour from there. So what's close to Hamilton? Kansas City is. Once you start looking at Kansas City, well, Kansas City has a regional quilt show every other year. So that's where the digging and unearthing comes in. And then just outside of Hamilton, in Des Moines, Iowa, is just spitting distance from Winterset, Iowa. Winterset, Iowa is home of Iowa Quilt Museum. And also there's a cute little quilt shop there called Pieceworks Quilt Shop. So all that works really well for a tour. Doing more digging, Pieceworks Quilt Shop was the original shop of a famous household quilter's name, Mary Ann Fons. Now all of a sudden it's has a double impact on my guests because there's a recognizable name, in addition to a quilt museum, in addition to a quilt store. So it just, like I said, when I work with DMOs, they put their thinking cap on, and all of a sudden, they all start talking, and I get emails, phone calls. We found this. We have a quilt exhibition here. It's amazing how quickly you can find the opportunities.
Now, you mentioned how important marketing is, and that's certainly true in any business. But I have to imagine that when you stepped in and joined your parents in the company and eventually took it over, that probably changed some things about how you do marketing. So tell us what that process has been like of kind of making the operations your own, and maybe some things you've done to modernize it or to bring in some new technology into it.
So when I came into the business, this was a basement run business by my parents. There were 2 computers and a 4-line phone, and worked very well for my parents. But there was no central server. So my father had documents stored on his machine that were different than the ones that my mother had stored on her machine, and different logos on this and this. So one of the first things I did is I put in a PBX phone system, a VoIP phone system, so that we could get rid of my mother calling on her cell phone, saying that I have a call on line 2, and then we put in a server. So that now, documents were centrally located. From that point, everything became unified. One of the other first projects that I did that was the initial start of me making the business my own is we did a massive overhaul and update of the website. So we took the website, which regenerated an audience for my parents, in the 90s, and we took it and completely rebuilt it, and that started the process of me understanding the depths of what goes on in the business. Then all of a sudden comes email blast. My father used to use a mail merge. With his computer, it would take overnight to send an email blast. And we put in a email blast program in addition to a Facebook page, and all of a sudden, marketing is now modernized. So those were big, important things to me. And then also, through the years, I then updated the look and feel of the business to make it my own, from a mauve colored stationery to a white stationery. We colorized the logo. We colorized the catalog completely. We moved from a copy-based catalog to a picture-based catalog. All of those steps, slowly making it leave, my legacy, my imprint on the business.
So I'm looking at your website now. It's a fantastic looking website. The imagery is great. Even the fonts are great. It's clean. It's easy to look at. And tour operator websites, between you and me, and I guess everyone listening, tour operator websites have been a pet peeve of mine for a long time, because so many of them are frankly just so bad. So
cheap.
They're cheap. And somebody built it 10 years ago and has never looked at it again, or they've never updated it. So can you kind of give our listeners your take on the importance of having an up-to-date and functional and good-looking website, and what kind of difference you feel like it's made in your business?
The importance of having a modern website is, I couldn't stress it enough. It's you have such a small window of opportunity once people land on your page to be able to capture them. The abandonment rate for websites is massive, and it's fast. If something doesn't work or it's hard to find, they just move on to the next. And for me, working in a niche business, I need to establish not only that we're a tour company, but that, we also, are a quilt tour company. But having a website that is functional, easy to navigate, clear and concise, continuity, meaning all the information matches, across cancellation policies. And then what I do notice about other tour operators is almost no one takes payments online.
Yes.
So we used to be a check company. You would fill out the registration form in the back of the catalog. You'd mail it in with a check, which is fine. We still get checks. But 95% come in online. So they book online with a deposit, and then they pay their balance online. It's service for the customer. If they have to take an extra step to now call and with a credit card, again, the abandonment rate jumps pretty high. So, being client focused, I think, is an important point for websites. Make it easy for them, make it convenient for them. And the expectation in today's world is that they can do it online without talking to someone. And then also, the follow up on it too. Just because they book online doesn't mean that that's the end. Now the communication, chain of command starts with automation of getting paperwork and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's huge. 95%. Would not have even guessed that. So do you feel like even your customers who are maybe in a little bit older demographic and not as tech fluent as, a Gen Xer or a baby boomer, do you feel like even they are comfortable with online payment and prefer that to mailing checks?
Absolutely. It's something that I've been very focused on since I came into the business is keeping up with my audience without abandoning my audience, but also not letting my audience die. So that means continuing to modernize, but also, hold on to the pieces that people are comfortable with. There are some decisions that we make that, for the better good of us as a business and just to modernize. I take a page out of the cruise industry's book. The cruise industry used to publish, for every guest, a bound booklet that had your tickets in it, had your luggage tags in it, had every shore excursion in it. Mm-hmm. And the cruise industry, all of a sudden, one year went completely digital. And you had no choice but to accept it. And it worked. And people are used to it.
So have you automated any of that back office work, creating documents and generating those, getting them out to people?
Absolutely. It's a slow process, and it certainly is a time-consuming one. But when I came on, to the business, we began the process of automation. So if you signed up for our newsletter through our website, it would automatically, send you a thank you, and 2 days after that, send you a welcome newsletter. So that was the start of automation. Pandemic certainly helped us kickstart the rest of that. Yeah. So prior to pandemic, we did mail confirmation letters, final balance letters, final paperwork, pre-departure paperwork, and now we've moved everything digitally, and it's all automated. So once they get put into the system, on key dates for depending on the tour, it automatically pushes out all the documents.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, so I bet we have some people listening who say, you know what, I'm not a quilter, but there are some things I'm passionate about, and I have some friends that are into. Maybe, railroad buffs or people who love college basketball or you name it. So for somebody like that who's thinking, hey, maybe I could find a way to start building some travel experiences around these shared areas of interest, how would you encourage somebody like that to get started? What's one or two steps that they can take to move in that direction?
So, I believe in, what my mother put together is make it unique and keep it quality. Have a mission statement and understand what you're going after. Make it something that people are interested in. It's easy to put together a tour. Anyone can stay at a highway hotel, but what will make you different? But it's a lot of fun to do, and you have to enjoy doing it. And you have to enjoy the people that want to take those tours. And if you're passionate about it and you put it together, with some good marketing and getting in there, they will come. So it does take a lot of elbow grease, though. Yeah. That's such a great perspective. I love that. So I'm going to let you go because I know you've got tons of good stuff to do today. Before that, where can people find you online if they want to know more about the company or more about you? There's all kinds of ways to find us. So at our website, countryheritagetours.com, you can find a listing of all of our tours. We do publish an annual catalog, full color, that you can view online or request a print copy. We're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, or you can pick up the phone and call us, which is the best way to get answers to your questions. And all that information can be found directly on our website. Yeah, fantastic. We're going to put that link in the show notes so people can click straight through and learn more about you guys. All right, I got a final set of questions that we ask every guest. These are just kind of fun things, so no pressure, but I'd love to hear what you say. First question, window seat or aisle seat? A window, definitely. I need a place to lay my head. So right against, because I'm sleeping on planes.
So it's not about the view; it's about the sleep.
No, it's not about the view. Plane is the only time that I can disconnect.
Yeah, I hear that. All right. Next question: what is one thing in your carry-on that you never travel without?
Ooh, one thing in my carry-on that I never travel without, it's got to be an iPad.
All right. If you have a free airline ticket anywhere in the world and a week off of work, where would you go?
That's an easy one. Portland, Oregon.
Oh, yeah. What's the connection for you?
Portland, Oregon is, in all of my travels, was the first place that I landed and liked all the bits and pieces of it, from community values to the architecture. Oregon itself, topography-wise, has beaches, has mountains, has fertile farmland. The people are good. They're family communities, and it's I've always considered it kind of the Brooklyn of the West Coast.
Last question: what is something you've seen or done on the road that you wish you could experience again with somebody you love?
Ooh, it would probably be in Vietnam. Taking a rickshaw or a tuk-tuk or a taxi with someone to really see how the people live and work. And then also taking a boat ride through some of the canals that the jungle is overgrown. When I did it last, it was like the Jungle Boat ride at Disney World, except this was the real thing.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. That's something I haven't done, but it is way up there on the list. So I envy you. I hope you get to go back someday and do it just for fun with somebody you care about. It sounds awesome. Well, Scott, thanks for being on the show. We appreciate it. And everybody go check out Country Heritage Tours. You will find a lot of inspiration, even if you're not a quilter. There's some great stuff on their website. So go check it out. Be inspired. And we'll see you down the road, Scott. Thanks a bunch.
Brian, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Scott Brodsky as much as I did. A few things he said in our talk that I want to recap because I think they're important for us to take note of. He said there's an endless pool of knowledge out there and that pursuing your passion should be in front of everyone all the time. Whether you are a travel industry veteran who's been doing this for years and years, or you're brand new to tourism, it's really important and encouraging to know that there is a ton of information out there. And if you follow your passions, dig into that information, bring a curious mind to the work you do, it's going to make you better at that work, and you're actually going to have a lot more fun as well. He said that he asked his DMO partners to put on their thinking caps when he's planning tours with them. And he also said that the DMOs actually enjoy digging around to come up with new ideas in their areas. This is something that is so important when you're planning tours, especially if you're planning customized tours. Don't be afraid to ask your destination partners to get creative, because when you invite them to collaborate with you in that way, you are going to be surprised, and they may even be surprised by how great the stuff is that they come up with and how much fun they have while they're doing it. He said regarding your website, he said you have such a small window of opportunity once people land on your page. And he said that 95% of his clients are paying online. That is fantastic. I think that's something that the rest of our industry should be aspiring to as well. And finally, he said, it's easy to put a tour together. What will make you different? If you are in the tour business, that needs to be at top of your mind at all times, is what makes you different. There are hundreds of companies out there offering tours, and people have lots of options when they go to book their vacations. But if you can offer them an experience that is different, that is memorable, that makes them feel awesome, they're going to remember you and they're going to travel with you again. All right, everybody, it is time for the Hot Minute. That is the portion of the show where I take 60 seconds to give you my unvarnished views on issues that are impacting travel today. Now, at the top of the show, we talked about how the staff shortages in the airline and aviation industries are making travel a real headache this summer. We're actually experiencing staff shortages throughout every sector of travel, honestly, throughout every sector of the industry in general, but especially throughout travel. Well, I have some thoughts about what that means for us, what that means about how we should go forward, and some ways that we can alleviate this problem. So let's put 60 seconds on the clock and get into it. Here we go. So for generations in America, we have been debating about whether or not we should bring in workers from outside the U.S. to fill jobs that we need filled. For a long time, people argued that immigration took American jobs and drove down wages. But I think over the last couple of years, we have a great case study that shows that when there are not immigrants coming in, when we do not have enough people here, it creates massive staffing shortages. Now, the travel industry has a wonderful track record of bringing in people from around the world to work in hospitality jobs, and it's actually been really successful. So let me suggest this to you. If you love travel, but you hate the hassles we're going through by not having enough staff and especially not having enough service workers, maybe it's time to rethink your stance on immigration, because it's not just the smart and well-qualified people we need coming into the U.S. We also need people coming in who will bus tables and do dishes and all the other hard work involved in tourism. That's the way I see it. You are welcome to disagree, and we can still be friends. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this or any other topic. You can send them to me at podcast@grouptravelleader.com. And you never know, your thoughts and ideas might just be the topic of the next hot minute. And hey, while you're in the mood to give us some feedback, would you do me a favor and go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating? We would love to get a 5-star rating. We'd love to have a review there where you can tell us exactly what you think about the show. That would really help us to get the word out to other people and to make sure we are putting out a podcast that is as helpful to you as it can be. That would be a big favor, and you have my thanks in advance for doing it. Hey, thanks also to Scott Brodsky for joining us today. Now, on the next episode of Gather and Go, I'm going to bring you a featured conversation with Cheryl Hargrove of Hargrove International. She's going to talk to us about how we can explore culture through travel. She's got lots of great stories to tell. You are not going to want to miss that interview. Until then, though, remember this. At the end of the day, we are all on this trip together. So let's make it a good one. See you next time on Gather and Go. Gather and Go is hosted and produced by me, Brian Jewell. Our publisher is Mac Lacey. Danya Simmons is our creative director. Ashley Ricks is our circulation manager and graphic designer. Our sales team is Kelly Tyner and Kyle Anderson. To advertise on the podcast, call Kelly or Kyle at 888-253-0455. Gather and Go is a production of the Group Travel Leader. For more information about our magazines, podcasts, and events, visit us online at grouptravelleader.com.